Good morning. Um, so I thought with all of us sort of indoors with this whole fun coronavirus thing, I am looking for a project or something to do other than working from home. And as a lot of you know, I've been hosting dinner parties and cooking. It's sort of a hobby of mine. So I thought I would share some recipes and how-to things that I've come up with over the years for a fun project since what the heck else do we have to do right now? Anyway, I thought comfort food would be a good thing to start out with, and what, better comfort than chicken pot pie. This is actually a two crust chicken pot pie. I know there's a lot of recipes out there for just like the chicken stew and then a puff pastry on top of that. This is actually bottom crust, top crust, like an actual pie. It's really, really good. So I'm starting with the pie crust this morning because it's a little cooler in the apartment. I think it's better to work with pie dough when it's not so hot, it's not so humid out. Also, I thought today was a great day because it's not raining, it's not too humid, because sometimes that messes with the consistency of everything. Cool. I have in this bowl right here already 3 cups of all-purpose flour and 1 teaspoon of fine salt. Now, I usually use kosher salt, but for pie crust, I find that the finer salt mixes in a little bit better. So that's 1 teaspoon of that. And also, I'm doing this kind of by hand, but I'm using this fun tool, which is a pastry cutter. It used to have one more tong, but it's been well used and broken. But anyway, some people use food processors. Some people like to sort of like work the butter and everything in by hand. I find that my hands are too hot and it melts the butter. So this kind of helps that along. Anyway, all right, in the freezer, just so it's super, super cold, I have already diced up 12 tablespoons of unsalted butter. That's the yellow one. And then a 1/4 cup of just regular vegetable shortening. So I like to start putting in the vegetable shortening first because this kind of dissolves into the dough a little bit more. The butter has a tendency to stay in pieces because it's a little bit harder. And I'm going to start breaking this in, cutting this in. I put everything in the freezer because you want all of your fats, whatever you're using. I like a blend of shortening and butter. Just because I think the shortening gives a little bit more of a tender, flaky consistency. And then butter gives a lot more flavor, but it also makes a sturdier crust. But anyway, if you don't want to use shortening, you can certainly use the same recipe with all butter. I just think for this particular thing, an all butter crust is just a little too rich, given what we're filling it with. But if I were making a fruit pie or something like that, that has a little bit more tartness, I think an all butter crust is wonderful. But anyway, so just started working this in. You can see it's kind of in little pieces here and there. That's kind of what you want. Now, I'm going to add all of this butter in. Seems like a lot. Keep in mind this is a 2 crust type of a deal, so you can also use the same recipe if you're making just a 1 crust pie. Just have the recipe. It's really easy to do. Before I start, I like to coat the pieces of butter with flour so they don't get stuck on this thing, which they still will do. I have to clean it off multiple times, I'm sure. But anyway, here we go. This takes a little bit longer just because butter is a little bit more solid, and especially since it is so cold, it's going to be a bit more of a job to cut this all in. How fun. See what I mean? I gotta clean this off now. Otherwise, I'm just kind of smashing everything and not cutting it. Okay. what I'm ultimately trying to achieve here is kind of a mixture that looks like that store-bought tub of Parmesan cheese. That's a little rubbly. It has some larger clumps of Parmesan. And in this case, the larger clumps will be larger clumps of butter. I'm gonna clean this off again. All right, we keep going. You don't want the butter to be completely pulverized and mixed into here, because what happens is once you add the water and you pull this all together, and then when you ultimately roll it out, you want those larger chunks of butter to be present and visible in the dough. Because when you roll it out and you flatten them and you smash them into the dough, that's what creates like the flaky layers, and it's really, really good. Okay. Isn't this fun?
It's also a good workout.
Yeah.
Since the gyms are closed.
Yep. All right, I'm gonna clear this off one more time. Now, the thing about working with pastry like this is, yes, it's kind of chemistry like baking, but unlike sort of measuring everything, mixing it, putting it in a cake tin and baking it like you would with a cake or something like that, it does vary from time to time. So you really have to like get your hands in there and feel it out. And again, like I said before, if it's raining or really humid, it's going to change the moisture content of your flour. That's going to kind of affect everything. So you have to kind of become one with this and figure out if it looks good to you, then it is probably good to go. See how it's starting to look like a little bit like Parmesan cheese, like we're gonna top some pasta with this. I think we're getting really, really close. This is looking good to me. Clear this off one last time. Yeah. I'm happy with this. You see these, it still has chunks of butter running through it, but it's kind of starting to come together a little bit, and I think we're good to go. All right. I have a half cup of water. Yes, I just use water. Other recipes use apple cider vinegar or egg or other things, and just pure water. It is ice water, because what you want to do is not really melt these pieces of butter in here, and so ice water will prevent that. We start with a half a cup in here. Do not put the ice in, obviously, but you're not going to use all of it. So you can't just dump a half cup of water in here and then hope that everything will come together. You have to kind of add it gradually and work it in gradually. And again, because I will eventually get my hands in there, but I have this like meat fork that I like to use to toss everything around. You don't need this, that's just what I use. But anyway, I like to start with sprinkling over about 4 tablespoons, which is a fourth a cup when you add it all up, and start mixing this through to sort of see where we get with this. And again, the amount of water you use will depend on the humidity, the dryness of the flour, all of this. So this is why it is not an exact science. All right, so we can see already that was never going to be enough for this amount of dough, but just like to start a little at a time. Now let's mix this in. Clear off the fork. All think we need a little bit more. You don't want this to ultimately look like a pasta dough or something that is fully cohesively and smooth. You want to, the goal is to use as little water, moisture as possible, because if you use too much water, your dough will become weird and greasy in the oven when it bakes. And we don't want that. We want nice, flaky, crispy crust to any of our pies that we're making. All right, time to get our hands in here, see what's going on. I think it still does need a little more water just to pick up some of these stray pieces of flour that are in here. All right, I'm hoping that will be my final addition. See how it's starting to largely come together? Oh yeah. All right, I think I'm gonna get my hands in here and see if we can start kind of bringing this together into a cohesive ball. And if we can't, we'll add a little bit more water to pick up some of these pieces on the outskirts that might not want to join the party, which I think we might need to do. I mean, and at this point, it's a matter of drops. Oh, yeah. All right. We're really come together now. That last bit of water really did the trick. And see how it's like, it's rough. It's a little shaggy. No, it's not that smooth homemade pasta ball, or like even like a bread when you knead it. And the thing is, we don't want to necessarily knead this too much. And again, my hands tend to be hot and they melt butter. I don't love it. If you run cooler than I do, it's probably a better situation for you in the long run. All right, what we want to do now, get rid of this. I have some just a crisscross here of plastic wrap. One going this way, one going this way. What we want to do is not divide this in half, because we will need a larger portion for our bottom crust, because it has more area to cover than just simply the top crust. So we want to make sort of one a little bit larger portion than the other. So I'm going to kind of pull this apart and see what it all looks like. All right, so this is a little bit smaller. This is just ever so much larger. I'm gonna put one of these balls in here. And as this rests, the water that we put in will begin to kind of hydrate the dough a little bit more and bring it together into more of a cohesive disc. But flatten it out just a little bit. I don't like to start with a major crack if I can in it, because when you roll it out, that crack will remain, so I try to smooth over those as much as possible. But again, I don't want to handle it too much to melt the butter. All right, we wrap each of these. I have another already made. This is the top, going to be the top crust. Work this through, get rid of these cracks on the end as much as I possibly can. Wrap this one up as well. All right. Great. Both of these into the fridge because we worked with it so much. The fat is, melting, and also we activated the gluten in this flour, so we needed to relax and come together. So minimum, I would say 1 hour in the fridge, but it can sit for up to a day, or you could freeze it or do whatever. So those get to hang out. I have to go to work from home, and we'll be back at lunchtime. Thanks.